FTC's charter impacts public and business is that they keep a close watch on the marketplace and companies and keep companies aligned to what they are promising they are doing. For example, if they're making any claims, they're doing any marketing, if they're doing advertising, that they are true to what they are claiming that they are advertising, for example. So when it comes to AI products, and as AI products are emerging, the FTC is really looking at identifying and preventing harms from AI in terms of the technology, the way it's built, the way it's rolled out, the way it's adopted, and as it impacts consumers in applying law. In doing so, they are looking to prevent harm to consumers and markets as that may come or as it may be impacted by AI becoming more ubiquitous. Debbie, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty much a good summation of it. I think the FTC really is the enforcement arm of the government, and they basically are involved in, as you said, what companies say they do. And a lot of these changes, or a lot of the new enforcement that we see coming out of the FTC, tend to be using the banner under unfair and deceptive practices. So their interpretation of the way that companies are using AI, they want to make sure that they're doing it in a way that is not harming consumers. And so they're really stretching their remit a bit. Anything obviously that has to do with unfair and deceptive practices will fall under uh, FTC, but I think that people are going to be surprised, or companies are surprised, that now that the FTC has taken on AI in this way.
Yeah, that's true. And I just wanted to kind of lead out with that. So there's a better understanding of FTC's role. So thank you very much. So let's talk about what's happening in the AI front and AI FTC. So November 22nd, which is a couple of weeks ago, the FTC has they said they have approved a resolution to facilitate the issuance of civil investigative demands in AI related investigations. CIDs are basically a form of a subpoena and a request for documentation and extensive um, visible proof of what the investigation is on. But when it comes to AI related investigations, there is a lot to talk about. Debbie, my question to you, you are very familiar with CIDs. Can you give us an idea of what is the impact on business when they are issued a CID?
Great question. First of all, CID, think of it as a lawsuit almost, except is worse. Worse than a lawsuit. Because let's say if someone served you a lawsuit, they go to a judge and they say, hey, we think this person did this. And the lawsuit, if you were served with one, it will tell you, hey, we think you did X, Y, and Z. This is what we want. So it's more clear about what is the point of the lawsuit and what the individual or company is seeking from you. If a company receives a CID, it can be is sort of like a lawsuit where there may be requests for information, but it may not be evident to you what exactly it is that the FDIC thinks or what they're seeking, right? So they may say, "Hey, Pamela, we want you to give us, data for these clients within this date range," right? And that's really that's all they may say. They may not say, "Hey, we think you did X, Y, and Z." So it people feel like it's a bit of a fishing expedition, and so people
Hmm.
who are very well versed in dealing with the government and these types of things, they can be very expensive. to respond to, because they can ask for almost anything, right? And so
Oh,
uh,
wow.
and it can go on for a while. So it can go on. It's not like, oh, I gave them these documents and then everything is over in 30 days or something like that. And these cases can go, they can escalate possibly to something that could possibly be maybe a lawsuit or a more formal investigation. So CID is more of like sort of informal, except that you have to do all the stuff that you would typically do in a lawsuit without knowing exactly why or what they're looking for.
So just to summarize that, because everyone may not be familiar with what you have to do for a lawsuit, I am not actually familiar with that either. What does that entail in terms of, let's say, so it sounds like there may not be a very well stated complaint or something, or some kind of similar to a complaint coming from the FTC, let's say. They may say it could be, it could be a number of things. What could be the kind of information they are seeking for a CID?
Yeah. Well, it runs the gamut, but in terms of AI, I think the types of things they will be asking for, obviously the FTC is supposed to be a guide to people in industry, and then they're also supposed to protect consumers. So they likely, for the AI use case, will be asking about data about consumers that a particular company has, particular AI tools that they're using, maybe documentation about maybe AI strategies, things that possibly happened in the past. Like, so what did you do in April of 2022 related to this or that, right? So a lot of this is about the
Mhm.
past, not necessarily the future or the present, right? So a lot of times maybe the FTC, whether you've done something, quote unquote wrong or not, they can send you a letter and they'll ask you, hey, we want you to give us information about this, whatever that is, and you give them
Okay.
the information. And a lot of times they follow up with additional things. So they say, okay, well, you gave us that, now we want this, or now we want that. And this can go on for quite some time. So it can be rattling and concerning for companies that don't know how to deal with this. Typically, there are very specialized lawyers that deal with these types of things. People who have a lot more experience in these types of things. But it's like, you know, it is bananas, really. So I think the
Oh,
prospect
gee.
that companies maybe that would not have ever gotten a CID before, they're gonna may get one now because of some AI tool that they're using. They should be very concerned.
Right. That's that is kind of, it just opens up a whole new world of, because AI being such a complex undertaking, and if for conventional systems it's not that very well understood or well defined, it can really lead to a lot of complexity when it comes to AI. It could, in terms of vulnerability or what you could be vulnerable for, or as a company be liable for. So at the end of the day, at least we have a high level guideline that they are really watching out for deception or discrimination when it comes to claims made by a company about protecting individual rights and against violations, um, at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. I think too, one really interesting thing you have to know about these CIDs. So again, it's about the past, right? What have you done in the past? So they'll be asking very specific questions about the past. So they'll be asking for previous documents, documentation. Let's say, for instance, you like one of the things on the list about data accuracy and integrity. They're not going to ask you, so what is your policy today about data accuracy and integrity? They'll be like, okay, a year ago, what, give me your policy on on data accuracy and integrity, right? So if you don't have one, you can't just create one now, right? So they are going to be asking, companies,
Okay.
as you know, as you well know, when companies go into using AI tools, they're adding more risk, right, to their organization, especially if they're not fully engaged in all the ethics and all the other things that they need to be concerned about. So making sure the right people have the right information, making sure people have the right training, make sure, especially if you're dealing in a industry where you're dealing with high risk consumer data, right? So companies in like health or finance or anything with biometrics, anything with children, those to me will be those low hanging fruit type of companies. Companies that are dealing with, let's say, IoT or health devices and stuff like that. If you're dealing with anything that could potentially cause some type of consumer harm, and the more grave the harm is, I think the more
Mm.
likely that a company could possibly get a CID. So, it is incumbent upon companies to make sure before they, I know they get excited about AI and they want to use it and they want to go out and buy stuff, right? But, with that, you know, uh, the benefits of AI also have risks, and they have to be able to find ways to understand and mitigate that risk. And if a company doesn't understand AI, doesn't understand those potential harms, they could be in big trouble. So CIDs can turn into, as you say, a CID typically is something that's non-public between the company and the FTC. But sometimes,
Mhm.
depending on what they find in that, it may become a public lawsuit. So FTC against X, right? So the hope is always, if you get a CID, you want to be able to answer them as quickly as possible. Hopefully, hope and pray that you've answered sufficiently, and you don't have to, have any uh, uh, problems with your business or have to make any huge
Yes.
business changes, and that it will be closed and it doesn't go into a more formal investigation.
Wow. So yes, so the this particular resolution is driven by the recent executive order that came out of the Biden administration on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. So that's really important to highlight that when a company is either adopting artificial intelligence or developing, it is equally applicable. And the Biden administration had encouraged the FTC to expand its regulatory activity and authority in AI. So currently, the FTC is really the only regulatory body that has some kind of ability to exact fines and penalties for non compliance with any claims a company might be making about being ethical, about ethical AI, about safety. But as a result of the Biden administration's executive order, that's what has led to this recent resolution to facilitate AI-related CIDs by FTC.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and I'm glad that you covered it in your post on LinkedIn. And I don't think people understand how big of a deal this is. Think of a company that maybe has never been in a lawsuit and never gotten a demand like this. I call it nasty
Mhm.
gram, right? So you get this letter, and people just go their head, everything's on fire at that point, right? Because you want to be able to respond as quickly as possible to close this investigation as quickly as possible, and hoping that you have all the right information in place that they're asking for, and be able to resolve that issue as quickly as possible.
Yes, thank you. And Debbie, going back to your point earlier, also that CIDs are typically not public. They're not disclosed. It's between the company and FTC. But the link I had done on related to AI and OpenAI on their CID that they got is extremely interesting, and there's a whole saga of how that played out. But I won't go into that. But what did result is that the CID they issued to OpenAI, um, they did make it public, and they are asking for evidence on transparency, on worthiness of AI. As you know, that's my area of expertise and focus. They are asking for things such as what information did you use to train your models. They're looking at copyright issues. They're looking at what data was used that could be be going to copyright infringement, for example, in this case. How ethical is the data? So it's a pretty big deal, as you mentioned. Now, one thing I've not seen is what came out of OpenAI as a response.
Right.
So that still remains to be seen of how
Yeah.
seriously it was taken. Or and actually, an important point I want to drive is how much of that information can really be shared, can be accumulated, aggregated. So, for example, if you're asking them to show um, transparency, show us all the data that was used. Now, this is a foundation model, right?
Hmm.
If you're scouring the entire internet to be able to go and exercise that and show all the information that was collected, and was it doing any copyright infringement? That is a pretty large realm, very large for anyone to
Yeah.
tackle.
I'm not familiar. I have not read the CID to OpenAI, but what typically happens with these is that there is typically a first contact with the FTC where they try to handle it sort of more privately. And then if that does not work, then there are public things that come out, public suits and stuff like that. But a lot of these requests, they actually do a pretty good job of trying to be very more surgical about it. So it wouldn't be like, show me all your, AI data. Maybe they have a particular thing that they're looking at, like as an example, like an exemplar, right? So let's say the Silverman lawsuit. I can't remember what's happening with that right now. Show me
Mhm.
the data, how you receive the data about Sarah Silverman's book in the lawsuit or something.
Right,
You know what I'm
right.
saying? So it's sort of like that, but a lot of times they don't really say why, what they're looking for. They say, okay, give us this, give us this, give us this. And then you have to wait until they tell you, okay, well, now we want more, or we think you did this. Right. So it is a lot of fact finding up front, right? A lot of trying to figure out what it is that they want and hopefully to be able to resolve the issue in a way that it is not like damaging to the company.
Yeah, that makes sense. That, and let's see how that plays
Hmm.
out, because it seems this was driven by CIDP, which is a organization, open, what's the word? Not open source, a not-for-profit organization. It's called CIDP, Center for AI and Digital Policy, and apparently they had filed a complaint against OpenAI, and they asked FTC to launch an investigation into OpenAI, and that seems to have driven the CDI that they published or issued against them. Let's see how that plays out. I don't have any more details into what OpenAI came back with, how how deep is the net or how wide is the net, right? It could be a combination of both.
Right.
But I think the I think it's good to know that as you are building these systems, AI systems, these are not conventional systems, and there is going to be a lot more complexity. So the more control you have over your your whole posture, whether it top down from management to the front lines, to the business units, right? It has to be extremely controlled, that whole process, because it's not just the FTC you need to worry about at the end of the day, right? But let's just talk about one more thing before we conclude, and that is data, right? Data and privacy. That's we talked about what can go wrong, what are some of the things that FTC can ask you for in a CID. And the biggest concern that we are seeing, and even with conventional systems and now with AI, is how AI is working, how it is interacting with users, and specifically the bias and the inaccuracies. So for example, maybe we can walk through a couple of examples of whether it's facial recognition or even a customer center call, right? When you call a customer care center, you are typically, a lot of times you're hitting a chatbot, right? And you're going through not one of the complaints, for example, that was filed in FTC's Sentinel systems. By the way, FTC has a system called Sentinel, which is pronounced, maybe I'll go slower, Sentinel. And that's where you can go and see, what queries have been placed and what are some of the uh, complaints that have come in, and consumer complaints that they're looking at. So Debbie, an interesting one was where, how sometimes you call into a customer care center and you are dealing with a chatbot, and one of the consumer complaints was that even when they wanted to, they could not break that loop and actually speak to a human being. So the way the company had implemented the chatbot for customer care center didn't have that process in place to have an override that if you wanted to talk to a human being, that you were had the ability to do so. So if you have any thoughts on that, please do share that. And if not, we can go to maybe another example, if that's good with
Yeah,
you.
I guess we can use that use case. So, yeah, so that's a great example, a very simple example, right? So a lot of companies use chatbots and they use them because they help them not have to use so many humans, especially when people want basic things, right? The challenge there is that, and I don't know, you and I have probably, I definitely have experienced this where you get online, you have this computer automated message. It tries to sound like a human, but we know it's not. And if the thing that you want is not on their menu, you kind of go into this whole
Hmm.
thing, and it's hard to get a person on the phone. And so I think that's a very common thing that happens, unfortunately. But as you were saying, that this FTC was looking at a particular company because they didn't have a way to actually have you connect with a human, right? Because not all chatbots know all the questions that a person may have or whatever. And so there's more of like, obfuscation of their responsibility to a consumer, especially if their person is a customer and they want to be able to get some type of customer care. This is actually a barrier to them
Right.
doing it. The way that I interpret this is they interpret this as being a harm to the consumer, right? It's like, okay, you have my business, you take
Mhm.
my money, but when I need something, you don't answer me, right? So a lot of times we see in some of the complaints or some of the things that the FTC decides to take on, they typically like to take on something, especially like this, that's more of an example, right? To make an example of those types of companies. So it's not as though every company that does this will get a CID, but the one that actually did or the one that they're going to investigate, they're going to definitely make a show of that and make sure that other companies read that and understand, maybe they need to change their process as well.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you. And like you mentioned, this is a simple example that applies to a lot of companies, right? And one of the points I wanted to also drive through on that was, not only is it simple and easy to understand, but also um, it is not just people or companies who are creating AI systems. It's implementation too, right? Where you have to watch how you're implementing AI systems and what you're using it for. That can be a either show up or throw up a flag of whether it's infringement or
Yeah.
false claim or something of that sort. And another thing that we can talk about maybe in another show is when it comes to authentication and deepfakes, for example, of using AI for malpurposes, and how the FTC would view that and act upon that. So, Debbie, what did you have any things you like to conclude on? Some parting words of wisdom.
Yeah, well, I'll just answer your the scenario that you talked about, which is very important, which is the implementation, right? So more companies will implement AI than will make AI. So just because you're not a maker of
Mm.
AI doesn't mean that you wouldn't get a letter from the FTC. When you're implementing these systems, you become responsible for what the system does, right? So regardless of whether you created the system or not, your use of that system will be looked on, very closely, especially if you're dealing in those high risk, high stake areas where it could potentially cause some type of consumer harm, whether that be like maybe a low harm, even though it's still a harm, is like you say, this customer who couldn't get in touch with a human with a chat bot, but and then maybe those higher risk things where people are being denied some things like credit, housing, anything with health related, anything like that. Like I think those are going to be the use cases we're going to see a lot. They're definitely interested in infringement, like copyright, stuff like that,
Mm.
because they feel like that's a harm to business, right? To someone's
Right.
ability to earn a living and things like that. So I think we'll just see more of that. And I think companies will probably be surprised they get a CID requests in the mail or via email. But I think the message, the takeaway should be, you need to figure out before you implement or before you are developing these tools. Regulators are looking very closely at how companies are dealing with this in terms of humans, right? So what are you doing to make sure that you're not harming humans, making sure that you're transparent in how you're dealing with these systems, especially when you're dealing in a high risk area.
Yes, and consumer interaction is definitely a high risk area, where, especially with the advent of generative AI, for example, if you're creating responses to a consumer on the fly, for example, right, that is not a scenario where you want to deploy it without having some controls and some checks in place. So I would definitely rate consumer interaction as a very extremely high impact for a business area.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, and I'm looking forward to our next session.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.